This is Nate at Stowe Training Systems here with part 2 of weight loss training. Yesterday we had with part 1 where we said to lose weight we have to create a caloric deficit. It's called thermodynamics, the law of thermodynamics. Much like the law of gravity, it just works. We can't argue with it. It's science. So unless we create a caloric deficit, we will not lose weight. Today with part 2 is just strategies to help get into that caloric deficit. Now the strategy is really important, but back to part 1, if you don't create a caloric deficit, it doesn't really matter. That strategy is going to be resistance training. So we can call it resistance training, weight training, strength training, whatever, whether it's a body weight, it's using barbells, you're doing CrossFit or a body pump class. I don't care as long as it's resistance training. This would be our next step behind creating a caloric deficit. Now, resistance training is really awesome for 2 reasons. One, you burn calories doing it, but more importantly, you continue to burn calories after you're done for up to 3 days. Compared to this 2 other forms of exercise where you burn calories doing it, but then you only burn extra calories for like 3 or 4 hours, something like that. Big deal, right? So I can burn calories for 3 days instead of like 3 hours. So that's amazing. Going to help us back to point 1, get into that caloric deficit. Also, an important factor is that body mass, muscle mass equals metabolism. The more muscle you have, the more calories you can burn. So when you're losing weight, when you're in that caloric deficit, we want as much of it to be fat as possible versus kind of an even split between fat and muscle to where, okay, we're in a deficit, we're losing weight, but now we're burning less calories, which means it becomes what? Harder to create a caloric deficit. So if we're doing strength training, resistance training along the way, we're losing weight. However, we're still burning just as many, if not more calories along the way because we have that muscle. And again, for the exercise itself, burning extra calories in the following days. So pretty useful whenever we're trying to get into that caloric deficit. As far as the resistance training itself goes, there's 3 things that really matter. You need to do these 3 things in this order. Number 1 is consistency. It doesn't work if you don't do it. So it doesn't matter what I say after this point. If you're not going to do it, it won't work. So what can you do? So be consistent. 2 or 3 times a week, you're going to be doing great. Step 2, we want to have something called progressive overload. That basically means that each time you do this workout, it becomes slightly more challenging, slightly more challenging, slightly more challenging. And this progressive overload needs to be planned out ahead of time in advance. You can't kind of show up to the gym and be like, I'm going to see how I'm feeling today, maybe make it a little tougher, maybe not. I'll see how I feel when I get there. Because we do that, you're never going to make it any harder because it's hard. But if it's planned out ahead of time, you can start to use a little bit, instead of using those emotions, you can use a little bit of logic and science to come up with some stuff that is more challenging but totally doable. And finally, 3, we want to focus on compound movements. So a single joint movement, something like a bicep curl where you're only working one muscle. Compound movement would be something like a pull-up where you're working the biceps, the back of the shoulders, the abs, you're working a whole lot more muscle. So again, you're burning more calories doing it, you're building more muscle and strength so you can continue to burn more calories when you're done. So part 2 of how to lose weight, you got to use strength training, resistance training to help support that caloric deficit. And when you're doing that, focus on things that you're going to do. Focus on progressive overload, plan it out ahead of time. Don't just walk in, decide what you're going to do right then and there. And compound movements beat single joint movements. But again, don't forget points number 1 and 2 where show up. All right, guys, if you like my help with this, I'm still taking on some virtual coaching clients. Just message me to learn more.